Welcome to this youth culture screencast looking at young people, crime and deviance. And this screencast is part of topic number 4, which we introduced in the previous screencast by exploring the concept of moral panics. Now in the previous screencast I showed you this graph which shows that the peak offending ages for criminal acts tend to be adolescence and early adulthood. So for males the peak offending age is around about 19 and for females it's around about 15. And it's estimated that 10 to 17-year-olds account for around about a quarter of all recorded crime, with nearly 85% of this being committed by males. And also, if we look at crime statistics, it's working class males and black males that have the highest rates of offending. So what we're going to do in this screencast is we're going to look at some of the sociological explanations that have been given for this link between youth and recorded crime. But we're also going to consider whether or not the overrepresentation of certain types of young people, such as young people from working class backgrounds or black males for example, is partly the result of negative stereotyping and labelling by the police. Now some explanations of this link between youth and recorded crime focus on the idea that there's something unique about youth that makes them more criminal. For example, Maruna argues that because younger people have fewer social responsibilities and ties, they have less of a stake in conformity compared to the older generations. And this means that informal social controls are less effective when it comes to young people, and there's a greater likelihood of young people engaging in risk-taking behaviour such as crime. And Katz argues that much youthful criminal activity may be committed because of the pleasure that it provides and the excitement of what sociologists call edge work. So edge work is behaviour at the edge of what is normally allowed or accepted. In other words, from this perspective, crime is seductive for some young people because of the buzz that is generated by the risk-taking, excitement and thrills that might be involved in committing criminal acts. And young people are more likely to be involved in activities in the public domain, so I'm thinking about places like pubs and nightclubs, that might bring them into conflict with other youths, the police and so forth. And they might also have a lifestyle that is conducive to opportunistic or unplanned crimes, as they may have more spare time in comparison to older people. And in contrast to younger people, older people are more likely to have certain responsibilities which distance them from public situations in which opportunistic criminality occurs. And these responsibilities include things like work, being married, having children and so on. The link between youth and criminality has also been explained in terms of peer pressure. For example, Fitzgerald suggests that image-conscious youth need to maintain and constantly update a sense of image and style through the clothes that they own, through their mobile phones and so forth. And they found that where family financial support was absent, crime was sometimes a source of funding used to maintain this sense of image and style. Now some sociologists have taken this idea of peer group pressure a bit further, and they developed the idea that some young people have norms and values that are so different to the mainstream culture that they can be referred to as a deviant or delinquent subculture. For example, the American sociologist Albert Cohen argues that working class youth, because of their experiences of failure in education and living in deprived areas, have very little opportunity to attain success within American society. So they feel that they're denied status in mainstream society and experience a sense of status frustration. And according to Cohen, they react to this situation by developing an alternative, distinctive set of values, what he calls a delinquent subculture. And this subculture is based on a reaction to and deliberate reversal of accepted forms of behaviour. And this means that behaviours such as stealing, fighting, vandalism, rowdiness, things which are condemned by society at large, become a way of earning status as a member of a delinquent youth subculture. And in this way, the delinquent subculture solves the problem of status frustration, since its members are able to gain status, albeit by methods condemned as delinquent and criminal by the wider society. Another sociologist called Walter Miller explains deviance and crime of youth from working class backgrounds in terms of the existence of a distinctive working class subculture which he suggests has existed for centuries. And this subculture, which mainly relates to males, revolves around central characteristics that Miller calls focal concerns. And these include an emphasis on toughness, a resentment, an opposition to authority, a search for excitement and thrills, and such values, or to use the jargon, focal concerns, carry with them the risk of law breaking and criminality. Now, these subcultural explanations of the crime committed by young people from working class backgrounds have been criticised. For example, David Matzer, in his research, found that most working class youth don't engage regularly in criminal acts, and those who do give it up in early adulthood. So Matzer suggests that many young people commit only occasional delinquent activities for a short period of drift in their lives before reaching adulthood. So most young people, according to Matzer, have little serious commitment to delinquent values or a delinquent way of life. In a similar way, Munsey has also argued that young people on the whole are actually very conformist, that there's very little evidence that young people are more deviant than older generations. So the argument here is that the major interests of young people tend to correspond to those of mainstream culture rather than being in opposition to it. And in fact, national survey evidence of young people's attitudes does seem to suggest that the overwhelming majority of young people are conformist in terms of their attitudes. For example, a study of nightlife in Newcastle by Chatterton and Hollands also finds that there's a considerable amount of conservatism in what appears to be irresponsible drunken nights out at the weekend. So they argue in their study that the idea of going out was not to get drunk, was not to find a sexual partner or to fight, but simply reflected the more obvious desire to go out with friends and to enjoy oneself. So this study concluded that going out provided young people with a social space away from educational work, where those young people could construct their own identities. Now, during most of this presentation, I've taken the statistics on young people and crime at face value, but many sociologists would argue that these statistics should not be treated as objective facts. For example, Sikharel argues that the police's subjective perceptions and stereotypes partly explains why young people are overrepresented in official statistics of recorded crime. And the argument here is that certain types of young people, For example, young working class males, particularly those from ethnic minority backgrounds, are more likely to encounter selective law enforcement. So as we can see in this picture, a particular source of grievance when it comes to black youth is how much more often they are stopped and searched by the police compared to other groups of young people. And as a result of this type of policing, they're more likely to have their behaviour defined and labelled as criminal.